he's just going on. Here we go again with all this talk that doesn't mean anything. I mean, just tell us what's going on here. And he's
let's get to it.
All right, here we go again with the same thing we just watched. He's saying a lot, but he's saying nothing.
Organizational policy and practices. Those differences might be driven by individual inspection officers. The differences could relate to racial, ethnic biases in profiling. So the differences tell us there's something going on here, but exactly what it is, we can't know without further in-depth analysis and discussion,
That's what we're here to find out. Let's get to it.
Also, I think it's important, my last point here in guiding principle is if we don't reach that threshold, which is a good thing, that there aren't these differences in how people are treated from what we would expect they would be treated. That doesn't mean that the agency should be any less vigilant in paying attention to these issues and ensuring equitable enforcement practices are occurring, and concerned that hidden biases that may not be representative in the data don't exist. So I see this as an ongoing issue, as Eric noted. And related to that, I'll also emphasize how unique it is that Trimet is really the only transportation agency in the country that's exploring this issue with this much depth and now consistency with this follow-up report.
You know why that is, right? I mean, if you ever go to the big East Coast cities, you'll see that the transit districts are made up of a majority of minority people themselves. Okay, that's the big employers. I mean, Trimet, what do they have for black minority employees? You go to Chicago, Boston, New York, you're going to see 30 to 40 to 50% or more of the transit employees happen to be black.
And not only that, you also see that in their union representation.
Right. That's right.
The data for my analysis, again, based on 2 years from March 2016 to 2018, that involved 48,060 fare enforcement incidents, and we're only focusing on the MAX. So this is light rail fare enforcement incidences. And I do sort of these two what I call baseline tests that explore what is the difference between what the actual data tells us and that expected likelihood of being engaged, involved in a fare enforcement incident. And we're utilizing a survey that Trimet has sponsored and has been ongoing since roughly 2011. And they have surveyors, third-party surveyors are going out.
You can stop it right here, okay?
Okay.
If he's using that as the basis of his whole total report, okay? You just built a house on sand.
Yeah.
Okay? Because what happens there is that a fare inspector gets on with a bright orange vest, and he's now accompanied by another gentleman, not in uniform, just plain clothes, with a bright orange vest, with a clipboard. They get on the train. Before he even speaks, the fare enforcement gentleman speaks, says, all I want to know is whether you have a fare or not. And, so the other guy, and asks you a couple other questions so the other guy can tally it. You know what is happening in that interim as soon as they step on the train?
People are leaving, right?
In droves. Because all they see is a guy with a badge on and an orange vest, and two of them, and they're not going to stick around to find out their intentions.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So their statistics of what they finally, trap the few people that they can finally interview, it doesn't represent what really is going on, which is a 35 to 40% fare evasion, not the 14 to 16% that they report. And so this guy's analysis, if he's using this as his part of his basis of what he's doing, he never went out to see what was really going on.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, he's almost wasted his time the last 2 years.
What they really should have done here is go to what used to be called Trimet Tuesday at the court, and that's when all the fear evaders get their hearings, and talk to them. Okay, if you want to find out about the people getting the tickets, go talk to the people who got the tickets directly, and they're all at the fear evasion hearings. They're trying to do this. Well, the Mercury delved into this a little bit better, and I'll read that in a minute here. You know, there's all kinds of holes in this study here, all kinds of holes.
Trimet inspectors, and they do this yearly, and they're asking people for FAIR. If they don't have FAIR, or they're recording the race, ethnicity of that individual and the reasons why they may not have FAIR or improper FAIR. For this data, we're using the survey results from 2016, 17, and 18, and we sort of average them for each race, ethnic group who was being caught without paying the fare on the max. So this becomes our expectation of who is likely to be caught without fare on the max.
I'm really not interested in hearing. It's such a flawed. It's a flawed because of what he's using as his baseline.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going here, though.
Presents first of all, on the top table is sort of the raw data of fair enforcement incidences, and it compares it from 2014-16 to 2016-18, and we can see that the total number of incidences has gone down about 9% in the most current 2 years, from 54,000 to 48,000. A fair enforcement incident can involve one of three things. So if you're being stopped, it's either going to involve a citation, a warning, or an exclusion. So you can add up those citations, warnings, and exclusions, and it equals the total fair enforcement incidences. We find that all citations are going down, warnings and exclusions are all going down. And in particular, I
and the reason they're going down is that they were directed by management not to write them.
Okay.
I won't use my pointer. I'm a little afraid to point the laser pointer at you folks. But exclusions have gone down 20% in the most recent 2 years.
As directed by management.
5,900 to 4,300.
And the other reason they've been directed to go down was they started to, they changed the way, let's say a supervisor had to go show up for court. He gets paid by Trimet for so much time, and yet when he comes back, there was a grievance, and I don't know how it worked out, of whether when he goes back on the clock at work, is that other time considered, part of his 8-hour day, and then it clicks in into overtime. So there was a discrepancy of pay and how much pay and how much time it took for them to get to court, down to court, back to work.
Right.
And the other was, if you actually went into some of these hearings, most of the cases, the judge knocked it down to either nothing or bupkis, and it turned out to be almost a waste of everyone's time, including the person who had the citation. I mean, it was a tremendous paperwork mill.
Yeah. Well, it's government bureaucracy. It exists. It exists for the sake of it.
Trimet was only getting a portion of the fair fines anyway, and the district attorney finally said, there are too many crimes. I am now going to declare the following livability crimes. And livability to crimes I came to use, which I was thinking was interesting, really means as the public, you're just going to have to live with the guy who was fondling himself. You're just going to have to live with the guy who's urinating on the platform. You're just going to have to live with the guy shooting himself up or drinking, because I am not prosecuting these anymore.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm going to really prosecute are, is that if someone gets killed.
I thought that they just stopped prosecuting simple fare evasion. You're telling
they stop, and also simple fare evasion. So it gets to the point of, all the statistics are going down because you're not enforcing anything. But while you're not enforcing anything, you're not increasing your presence, so the bad behavior actually is going up, and you're not collecting any revenue.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. Well, I don't know. The society is.
The only solution is to wait for a Harry Support PowerPoint presentation.
Another notable finding that should be pointed out is the race ethnicity of a rider is based on the perception of the inspection officer. And there was a significant increase in the number of riders who were perceived as unknown. The inspector couldn't determine what their race ethnicity was. In the prior 2 years, 14-16, it was 962, and it went up to 2,700.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think this is an important issue for Trimet to follow up in the future years of the data, because the unknown category is one that we really can't use and comment on.
Right,
and I did a little bit of
the fare inspectors and the police, everyone was marking it unknown, was, I am not going to ask you what race you are, and if I assume and I'm wrong and it comes up in court, I'm toast. So I'll just put unknown.
And so,
I don't know much about that. Look, I find the whole fear enforcement strategy absurd. Okay, I just do. A lot, like you just said, it's a lot ado about nothing. The fines, they were $175 until recently, which is way over what people can pay. It's predatory. I just see the whole thing as a predatory government here. It's preying on the citizens.
I think there should be a fare, because a fare, and it's the only phrase I ever liked from Al Gore, gives a governing authority. If you have a problem with someone and you need to engage them in a question of what they're doing, the legitimate question is, do you have a fare? Is the gambit to open a legitimate conversation via law enforcement supervisor.
Yeah. I'm a big supporter of fare-free transit. They do it in places in Europe, and the kind of money that gets paid out to executives and capital projects, citizens deserve to not have this around their necks.
They have tried it in certain places in this country. They have reverted back to instituting a fare because there was no governing authority.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. I'm going to look into that. I don't know about that. I'm not sure.
Houston tried it. A couple other places tried it years ago. It turned out to be that the incidence of violence went way up.
It did. Really.
And so without a governing authority, if you're going to have free fare, you have to have an increase in presence of people to maintain law and order.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you don't like the term law and order, how about social graces?
Yeah, I just, well, okay, I don't know. I have not heard that before. I know that Americans are not Europeans, and
right, and the reason Europeans view buses, trams, streetcars as, quote, transportation, not a social service.
Well, that's true, right? That's correct.
And that difference between viewing it as transportation and social service is the gap.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
In the rate of violence that goes on.
That's an excellent point, and I never actually heard it put that way. Yeah, good. That's good to know. I hadn't looked at it at that level, from that perspective.
And it could be an issue around training, and meaning perhaps some more training and clarification of how to do the recording of race in these incidences, and that a few inspector officers were sort of driving that higher number of unknown category. We're going to go to the next slide, which is just highlighting those main conclusions of the sort of the raw data that we're seeing: declines in total fare evasion incidents, 9% reductions across citations, warnings, and exclusions. Exclusions are down 20%. These declines are occurring for all racial ethnic groups. Conclusion 2 is sort of the need to explore this unknown category, and maybe some training around that is necessary. The next slide presents the results of sort of this first baseline test. The first column in that table, baseline percent evaders, those are the percentages based on that average of the 2016, 17, 18 fare evasion survey. So that survey, when they went out and asked riders if they had fare, and the surveyors are recording the perceived race of the riders, they found that 17% of fare evaders were African American, 61% of fare evaders in that survey were white, etc. And so then we compare that percentage to the actual percentage that racial ethnic group shows up in the fare enforcement data. And we're looking to see if there's a difference there. And if the difference is higher than 5%, and that's a threshold that's been utilized in racial profiling literature with police car stops that we're applying here, if it's higher than that 5%, that puts us in that noteworthy category where, hey, something's going on here we should pay attention to, we should look into it with a little more depth. And we find when we compare this first column based on the fare evasion survey to the actual data, we don't find any instances where that difference is higher than the 5%. So the differences between fare evasion survey results and enforcement outcomes are small and indicate little disparity across race, ethnicity. There is elevated exclusion rate for African Americans, which was noteworthy in the 2016 report. That difference has gone down in this report. It doesn't exceed the 5% threshold. It's at 4.3%. And that's something in this report I wanted to dig into a little bit deeper with some new analyses that I didn't do previously. So in general, the Test 1 result for disparity, the results are good news in that none of the racial ethnic groups are above that threshold category of disparity. The next table looks at repeat offending, which was sort of a new issue that we explored and identified in the 2016 report, and it still remains a unique challenge for Trimet. In that, if we look at all the individuals involved in the fare enforcement incident, and I had their last name and date of birth, and so I was able to, if those matched up, they were in there within that 2-year period. Anybody who was in there more than once I call that a repeat fare evader. So out of all the incidences, 33% involved an individual who was in there at least one other time in the prior 2 years. And then you can see the breakdown of all repeat fare evaders. 64% of repeat evaders were white, 22.8% African American, 4.7% Hispanic, 2.8% Asian. The next column over looks at within each race. So I pull out everybody who's categorized under each race and ethnicity and look at the proportion of them that were involved in least 2 or more fare evasion incidences in the 2-year period 2016 to 18, and we see a much more pronounced repeat fare evasion rate for African Americans. 46% of African American riders or incidents involving African American riders involved an individual who was there 2 or more times.
The only one, the repeat fare evaders, African Americans and Native Americans are higher than. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Of course, these are the 2 most economically depressed populations. And
it's not all economics. I guarantee you.
What do you mean it's not all economic? What is it then?
A lot of it is this self-entitlement that I ain't going to pay and you're not going to do anything about it.
I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I agree with you there. They get. Look, they're going to get. They're going to get.
I mean that attitude. I found pretty pervasive when I drove, and I drove the extra board all over. That attitude is.
But you don't think there's any economic reason for that?
Oh, I'm not saying it's. As I said, I picked my words. I said it is not all economic.
I think it all stems from economic conditions.
I think part of it stems from economics, but it's not all economically driven.
You think it's just like the man? I'm going to fight the man. Is that what you're trying to say?
Right. And
I don't know. I don't agree with that.
And these statistics are. I mean, you know what this guy really needs is the video of when these guys, these people taking the survey on, and showing how many people are heading for the doors, on the back doors, as soon as they see them either on the platform or step foot onto the train.
Yeah, you're a little.
Yeah, I mean, his statistics are just will be blown out of the water.
Yeah.
This whole survey is based on a methodology that is just, it's consistent, consistently wrong.
And that was similar to the 20.
Well, I'm not going to agree with your point of view about the who's evading. I'm going to disagree with that. I think it all stems from economics. I think that it's quite consistent. The lowest economic strata citizens are 1, Native Americans, and 2, African Americans. Those are the 2. The Native Americans are the bottom of the barrel, followed closely by African Americans, and they are the 2 most repeat.
I agree with you. I mean, most of the trouble I have ever had that landed up involving a transit police have been these 2 groups.
Yeah. But they're you have to look at this in the context of economic suppression and the brutality of the existence of an American citizen based on money. There's a clear connection between the lack of money and the quality of your existence. And that's been shown that if you don't have money, you don't eat well. If you don't eat well,
your health goes to hell, and everything else pretty well follows.
Well, the brutality of the lowest economic, if in the cities especially, where you have the lowest economic strata, people all stuck together there, it's high crime because there's lack of money. It's a simple equation there.
Right. And
you don't see people in gated communities.
And the crime statistics bear that out.
Yes.
Of where the crime is happening, and that the crime is against the group is against their own people, because that's who's around.
Yeah. That's where they live. Yeah. I mean, they can't go to the gated community and do crime because they're not there. Right.
16 report. So again, once again, fare evasion, repeat fare evasion is a unique challenge, and it's a little more pronounced among African American riders, and that potentially leads into that elevated exclusion rate that we find for African American riders, which is explored in this next table. And this just looks at African American riders and white riders and pulling out people who were excluded. So among African Americans, there was 966 exclusions that involved an African American, and if you look at the number of persons involved in it, it was 732 persons. Okay. And for white riders, there were 2,683 persons who were excluded in that 2-year period, 16 to 18. The next column over, I looked at persons who had 3 or more exclusions within 2 years. For African Americans, that was 56 persons. For whites, it was 142. And then we look at the proportion of African American exclusions that were due to those 56 people, or in the next column down, the 142 white individuals. So these 56 African Americans were excluded 249 times in a 2-year period.
What I don't see here is why they were excluded. It wasn't due to fare, was it?
I think that's what he's saying.
Because most of the exclusions, my understanding,
are behavior oriented.
Was due to behavior.
That's what I thought too, but that's not what he's saying.
Percent of all African American exclusions. So one way of thinking that if those 56 people were only excluded once, the percentage of African American exclusions would be reduced by about 4% total. So there is an issue of chronic exclusion occurring, and it's also occurring for whites. It's not as pronounced as African Americans. So those 142 white riders with 3 or more exclusions in 2 years, that represented a total of 572 exclusions, or 20% of all white exclusions were due to these 142 individuals. So again, I see this as another important finding, a new finding that we didn't explore last time. So when we look at those elevated exclusion rates for African Americans overall in the very first table in the data, we could say that that's being driven by a very small number of persons who are receiving a large number, in some cases, at least 3 or more exclusions.
3 or more. There have been times where I've been listening to the security channel. The guy has 7 exclusions in his back pocket.
Yeah, no, I've heard them too. He's got 50. He's got 20 no pops and
right,
and several criminal activities too.
Right.
Whatever.
So it's not fair. It's other actions or behavior that are doing it. And actually, when you listen to some of the security channel, the person doing it, the dispatcher or the controller, will say, "Do you want the most recent, or do you want the complete history?"
Some of them have dozens. I know.
It takes 6 pages.
Yeah.
On the computer. So how far back would you like to go?
Right.
And so what I'm saying here is Harry supporter in the group, this data is important that shows that you can zero in on a small portion of known perpetrators.
Well, what do you do with them, though? I mean, put them in jail for fare evasion?
That would be something for Harry and this group to focus on instead of trying to solve an overall problem which is being caused by a very few people. The number, if you actually add his numbers up, there's less than 500 people that are causing probably 70% of the problem on the train. And
okay, wait. Here's the other ones here. Now here he goes into this.
Just breaks down exclusions by type.
See, now look at this. Fare-related exclusions make up half. Okay, so they do exclude you for fare evasion, which seems completely ridiculous to me. I mean,
reasons for why one can be excluded, and that's recorded in the data. The majority of the reasons why one is excluded is that it's fare related and repeat fare related, not paying fare multiple times over time. But other exclusion types could be prohibitive activities they're engaging in, prohibited misuse on the platform, criminal activity. The majority of those.
Will you tell me what criminal activity is, please?
Criminal activity is you're loitering around. I didn't see you sell the drugs, but you are selling drugs.
Wouldn't they be arrested by the police for criminal activity? What's Trimet have to do with that? I don't get that. I mean, excludes.
And let me go back to the fare invasion where you see half. That usually only. The exclusion only usually comes, and he doesn't show the statistic, is after they do the R check, that, gee, guy, you've been warned at least twice already. This is the third time.
Mm-hmm.
So you've received a warning before you ever got an exclusion. Maybe not once, but twice. But third strike here, you got an exclusion.
Yeah, I don't get the exclusions really.
So that fare exclusion doesn't come up usually on the first time.
No, I would hope not. I would hope not. Jesus.
And the only time it really sort of comes up the first time is on the person's attitude of the interaction with the person writing the warning. Quote, they have a choice of a warning or a citation. And I am only got a couple more minutes before I lose the battery here.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you want to sign off now? We can finish this up tomorrow if you'd like.
I can go a little bit more.
Okay.
Activities was somebody who had a prior was already excluded, and they were found on the Trimet that makes up most of that criminal activity.
Oh, okay.
It's interfering with public transportation.
Okay, so he just said what the criminal activity is. You're already excluded, and then you get caught being on the system again.
On again.
Yeah, that's.
But there are other activities of criminal activities.
But that's police stuff, though. That's not transit. I mean, actual criminal activities is where the police come in.
And the other thing that skews these statistics is if a minor is involved, the way the gang enforcement unit, fare inspectors, supervisors how they have to handle it is completely different.
Yeah.
And so those statistics, usually they get a warning and say, look, guys, straighten up, fly right, get out of here. But you don't want me to call your parents, do you?
Yeah, right.
Prohibited risks to security and order is another exclusion category. There wasn't much racial ethnic variation in these exclusion types at all to report. The next slide looks at the issue of geographic variation and stops, and so does there appear to be any particular stops that might be generating a much higher proportion of racial ethnic stops? And this table breaks down
I'm
the locations.
low battery here. I'm about ready to go.
All right. See you later, Neal. We'll pick this up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll be in touch.
All right. Bye.
Bye.